Welcome back to the Blue Chip Academy, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the game behind the game. I'm your co-host, Ryan Mundy, sitting alongside Justin King, and we are two former NFL athletes, founders, and individuals who have seen every side of the sports ecosystem, from being highly recruited, competing at the highest levels, to transitioning into life after the game, and everything in between. Now we're here to share our knowledge and wisdom with the next generation of athletes. I'm going to toss it over to Justin real quick. How you feeling today, Justin?
Feeling good, man. It's camp season. You know, in the summer, all the guys going around, getting evaluated, checking out different campuses and, you know, seeing guys compete. But things have been good. Summer break is here for the little one. So it should be fun. I'm going to drop a couple.
Man. It is camp season, gearing up for the actual season. The guys are going around the campuses and really like showcasing their skills. You want to talk about your experience with that a little bit?
Yeah, man. First camp I went to Ohio State last Thursday. Nice camp, man. Saw some of my guys, former teammates, friends, Tony Johnson, Ryan Mayhew, some guys I used to work with, Coach Johnson back in the day that used to coach us at Penn State. But no, it was a really cool scene to see, like, from there and then going to Penn State on Sunday, watching guys compete, how the different evaluation processes operate, how different teams, you know, interact with the recruits, you know, at the top level. Keeping it real with these guys. The main takeaway, I think, from both camps that I went to is how simple the drills were. Like everything that you see on social media, online, when you see guys training, it's like the obstacle courses and very intricate details. But when you got into camp, they just wanted to see if you could move your mass and you could be efficient and explosive. And guys could not do the simple and explosive.
So no IG drills at these camps?
Nah. So fellas, you get ready. These IG drills are not the key, man. Make sure you're explosive, quick.
A lot of footwork, but are you going to do all that in the game?
Man, the cadence of the game, you got to match that. If not, you're wasting time. So that's what we saw.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. I definitely got to start making my way to some of these camps and checking them out, man, because I can only imagine that, you know, the landscape, when we talk a lot about this, but the landscape has changed so much since, you know, I was in high school, and that was damn near almost 25 years ago. That's wow. It's been a minute, but a lot has changed. And today's episode is a big one, man. And I'm really excited to dive in and talk about it. When we talk about change and when we talk about like the landscape of collegiate athletics evolving, last week, a federal judge officially approved a $2.8 billion, that's a billion with a B, class action settlement in the case of the House versus the NCAA. And basically, this is a decision that is going to reshape college sports as we know it. And so for the first time ever, schools will be allowed to directly share revenue with athletes. And this is a huge shift. We're talking about a move away from pretty much the old amateurism model, and one in which we were both a part of, where, like, you know, you couldn't get paid for your name, your image, and likeness, let alone get paid by the school. And so now here we are in this new ecosystem, this new environment, and it's really moving towards something that looks a lot like professional sports. And so in today's episode, we're going to break down what this settlement actually means, who gets paid and how, and most importantly, how athletes and families should start thinking about their value, their leverage, and the strategy moving forward. You ready to dive in, Justin?
Man, let's go. This is a deep, nuanced one, but it's changing the game, and you got to prepare early. Let's just put it that way.
As my dad says, the great Gregory Lee Mundy, preparation meets desperation every single time. So let's just start out and walk folks through how we got here. Like, let's break down the details and some of the bullet points on like what exactly this House versus NCAA settlement is about and why this case hit so hard.
No, for sure. So, I mean, we could take it back. Like, I think it all started with the Austin case back in, like, I can't even think of the actual year, but it was like 2018, 19 when it really started to really get into the weeds of it. But it was more about the educational benefits that cover in high school, right? So when I was at Penn State, there was a cost of attendance that they brought into the game. Everybody remembers back in 2005 or 6 when the point guard for UConn made the statement that in the Final Four that they didn't have food to eat and he was going hungry and different things of that nature. I think it was Shabazz Napier was the point guard back then. And he mentioned that and it caused like an uproar. And this was probably like 05, 06 timeframe to where it got to the courts. Obviously, Austin case and everything came back around, and I'm dating it because there's always been a lot of different things with the course, even going back to UCLA back in the early 90s. But from that's when the emergence of the NIL era and the transfer portal era came. We talk about the athlete empowerment era, is like we like to call it in the business, because that's when these different rules came about, whether it's cost of attendance, transfer portal, NIL, everything that try to pay the players or close the gap without making them employees. What everyone needs to understand is that these schools are nonprofit entities, and to make the players employees, they lose some tax benefits and money that they get from the government. So that's not a part of the plan. And the amateurism model doesn't necessarily cause to pay the players because they're not professionals. So that whole flip changing with the settlement is pretty much showing is that these guys are now entities of the school that they need to pay, and that they're able to pay them out from the revenue sharing that they get from the TV deals that are coming in from the different networks, versus them just going out and having to secure, let's say, tips from like marketing deals and things of that nature from third party entities, where it's like, no, you're going to get some of the revenue that actually comes through the ecosystem. What makes that a little interesting is now we talk about the evaluation process, financial flexibility that always existed in college football is no longer there. And that trickles down to the evaluation process, the recruiting process, and everything else into the business for a family that's going through, because now we're really talking about amateurism being dead, and they're going to be expecting you to move like a professional if they're going to be paying you some dollars.
Yeah, dollars make the world go round, and it's always been a big business in college sports. And so, this time is definitely long overdue. And when you talk about like having food to eat, I remember in my group chats from a lot of my Michigan friends, we always jokingly say they used to give us these things that we used to call chits. And basically a chit is like a meal voucher or like a local restaurant. Each meal voucher was worth $15. And it was a few local restaurants on campus. And then like the big one for us was Outback Steakhouse. So like we would collectively like pull all of our meal vouchers together and eat like kings at Outback every once in a while. But it's come such a long way, man, because I think back to those times, and it's interesting because when I think back at those times, I didn't feel like I missed out on anything, or I didn't feel like necessarily like I was lacking in any area, whether that be financially, whether that be from a meal standpoint, et cetera. But I'm just speaking about my experience, and not to kind of dim the light and also take away from the importance of athletes getting paid, but this is just due, right? And I think this is very, very important to just kind of level set when we do talk about like the evolution of sports, the evolution of the athlete. Like just because things were a certain way back then doesn't necessarily mean that they were right. And also just because the things were a certain way and I was comfortable and I still made it work doesn't justify it anymore. And I definitely don't want to be the old guy that don't like back in my day, we made it off of $15, et cetera. So it's been a long time coming. I'm excited to kind of see where this kind of takes shape, but really just thinking about like, what are some of the benefits, not necessarily from an athlete standpoint, but how are schools thinking about this? Penn State versus a smaller school, even like a Pitt, right? Like that may not be as well resourced. Like how are some of these schools thinking about it?
I think now when you bring in a budget and like some level of a salary cap, now you're talking about losing the financial flexibility that you've always had, right? Now that financial flexibility is gone based on the assets or the evaluations that you're doing, you have to have a lot of quality control on the operation in football, I think, or in every sport, because now you have to account for that money that you're spending. I had breakfast with Kevin Colbert a couple months ago, and we were talking about like that meeting when they had a draft pick and you had that dead money on the table and you had to go meet with the Rooneys about, hey, what went wrong in this conversation? That's a conversation that has never happened in college sports. So when we talk about athletes coming up, like, yo, you're a teenager, but like you're a true asset that's going into this ecosystem, and how you're going to be evaluated is going to start to shift into a more pro-like model, right? And like the predictability of how well and how much value you're going to have on the team, that value and exposure that you provide, and really preparing them for the business. We talk about that, but like earlier, to be equipped to take advantage of all the different opportunities that are there. So like, I think when you look at the different teams, you got to look at them developing a philosophy and operating, how they're assessing value, what their team philosophy is, and like finding the right people that fit within that. Because the key to look for it in this day and age is going to be stability. When guys can chase money here, there, and the NIL and transfer portal, It's teams having that true alignment from economic impact and how much money they bring in to like talent acquisition from the players that they bring in, everything in between, right? The operation, the coaching, the development, and all those different type of things. And that's going to be the product. So,
yeah. Does this basically mean that like amateurism in college sports is dead? Like, can we officially say that now?
Amateurism is dead. Yes, it is dead.
Finito. It's a wrap. Okay. So I think also, so we talked a little bit about like schools, but let's zoom out a little bit. Like, what does this mean for the NCAA moving forward?
So they play a really interesting role because they're losing power by the day, right? I think even the entities that at the end of the day, like you think of college basketball, women's basketball, college football, the main trophies that these teams are competing for are a part of an entity that is not governed by the NCAA, right? Like the college football playoff is not a part of the NCAA. Like the Final Four is not a part of the NCAA. So like everything that we're talking about where this money's coming from and the media rights and all those different things, there's already entities that exist that these teams are participating in. So I think that leverage point, I think everyone is just taking the rose-colored glasses off of the NCAA. It's like, hey, you're like a rent-a-cop for real. And like prove it now. Like look now they're just flashing, now they're showing their flashlight.
Yeah.
So like that's where the NCAA fits in. But when you have leaders at the NCAA at the college level that have been used to listening to those rent-a-cops, it gets a little interesting to which ones decide to push those bounds and the outcomes. I always like to point at your man, Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, but like, hey, I said crime pays, right? He pushed the bounds a little bit. He took some leadership. They won a national championship.
It's kind of like that Scooby-Doo episode, how like Scooby-Doo and the crew, like they're chasing people around and then they pull the mask off and then they're like, oh, it's Mr. or Mrs. And it's like, they knew who this person was the whole goddamn time. Like, oh, was this you? Oh,
yeah, that's exactly it.
Because I was going to ask too, and it's interesting that you brought up Jim Harbaugh, but like if there is credit or like attribution as it relates to like really pushing this conversation forward and getting this across the finish line, both from a legal and cultural perspective, you mentioned Jim, like where do you think some of the credit goes to kind of get us to this point?
I mean, the credit goes to the NCAA for the standpoint of not acknowledging, athletes as players, right? And then there's a little bit we talked about earlier. When we think of the revisionist history that some players have of their actual value, sad to say, what I'm always trying to tell people is like a lot of players don't have much value. There's certain guys on teams that have a lot of value that would have got a lot of money when they were playing back in the day, right? Whether it was like the team making money, like they called us the Fabulous Four. There was different things that happened where like there was money, like linebacker you. There's entities in the place to make money, but a lot of players don't have any value, right? So I think that's sometimes the realization that happens with players where like just because you play doesn't make you valuable. There's actually a process that you have to go through to be valuable, even at the college level, because there's a level of a facilitator player. Like you need enough players to facilitate a game, and that like not getting misconstrued of like your value versus you're kind of the legs of the table. You're not on the table. And we got to make sure that we understand, hey, we need to get on the table if we're going to be valuable in this, that, and the third, because the business is going to treat us that way. And so I think that's like the learning experience of athletes going through the process, parents taking their athletes through the process, and how teams are even being built, to be completely honest.
Yeah. It's interesting. And the legs are very important to the table. Without the legs on the table don't stand up, right? So those who are listening out there, don't feel some type of way. It's just like, how do you position yourself, not only from an education standpoint, but from a skill development standpoint and everything in between, like, and understanding like, hey, this is my starting point, but this is not necessarily my end point, because at each and every level, like you start at the bottom of the totem pole and you have to do what? You have to work your way up, right? So like, take it with a grain of salt, take it as you will, but understand that like, there's always a process of like, hey, like I may have been the man here, I may have been the best athlete there, but like once you move to that next level, you're back to square one and you got to do what? You got to prove it again, right? So like you got to be the stabilizer, you got to be the legs, whatever we want to call it, but there's always going to be an opportunity for you to do what? Earn your value, right? Whether that be on the practice field, in the weight room, in the meeting rooms, on the game field, whatever it is, man, like you just always got to make sure that you're showing up and showing out and doing your best.
1000%, because if you have dreams of playing any sport at the collegiate level, like you have to continue to do your best and not only celebrate when you get there, but continue to do
you got to get better
and develop, because like we experienced in professional sports, every single year they're looking to take your spot. That was something that, I mean, we talk about that transition from amateurism where it's almost like, hey, you got time to develop. You got 4 years to get your degree, like this and that and 30. And then NFL, man, you got 12 months, you got 6 weeks. Man, matter of fact, it's week to week. And I think that's what people, like a lot of families and athletes need to realize is like, man, even coming out of high school, like if you're deemed a highly valuable player, just realize that they're then going to judge you on that price tag after that first year, right? So like when you talk about making roster cuts or just making sure you're getting under the cap, all you do is go down the number first. Like you're not looking at the name, like, oh, is he worth that? And so just making sure that we're always finding that value and driving that up, because we talked about it with Shador, like a lack of self-realization of where we're at sometimes messes up our journey as well. So when I'm saying, like you said, when I'm saying the legs, awareness, it's not necessarily saying that the legs are bad. It's like, yo, be the best pair of legs that you could be so you can get promoted. You know what I mean?
Be the best leg, 100%. Let's dive into a little bit of dollars and cents, man. We gave a high level overview of like the settlement, some facts and opinions about it, but let's get into a little bit of the money side of things. And let's talk about like who gets paid and how. So as mentioned, like this is a $2.8 billion class action settlement, but break down for us, like how this money works. Like as a former player, like I graduated in 2007. Am I eligible for payments? Like how is this money being spread out?
No, so for you in 2007, I think we kind of predated. Yeah, we out of the class action. We can't get no cheese from this. But I think it's 10 years back. I don't know how they're going to do the average payouts for the damages, like $91,000 from broadcasting damages from NIL and $40K from performance damages, totaling around like $130, $140K for players over the past 10 years. But like moving forward, like how the schools are going to continue to implement, it's going to be a $20.5 million budget or cap per school. And then they're going to have to break that up. Essentially 22% of athletic revenue going to the different sports. Most schools opting for the majority of that to go towards football and basketball. So it's very interesting. Like if you're playing those sports, football and basketball, obviously that's going to be a little bit more competitive because for the level that you need to get in to qualify to be worth something, to have a roster spot, because along with the money comes roster spots, right? So less roster spots with that. But there's another interesting thing for those girl dads out there is that there's a caveat when they talk about the Title IX, not to get into illegalese, but there'll be a lot of lawsuits that come with that. But there's something that if schools increase their women's sports scholarships, they get an increase of like $2.5 million for their cap to spend. So that's something interesting to see, like moving forward in some of the other sports on how some schools kind of subsidize some of those sports like tennis or Olympic sports to try to encourage, again, some remnants of the holistic athletic development for all. But that's going to be interesting how athletes evaluate schools when they're going through the recruiting process now. So I think that just everything that I'm saying is just shows that's going to make the recruiting process that much more of a business operation.
Yeah, I just saw online that University of Michigan, they're allocating, I think, 75% of their budget to football. And then I think it was football. I got to go back and check.
No, it was probably football.
Yeah, 75% of it was football. And then like an additional maybe 10% or so was allocated towards like or men's and women's basketball or something like that. And then let's just call it 15. And then that gets us to 90. And then the remaining 10% was spread across all the other sports. And so that I think makes sense, right? Because like football is a huge revenue generator, and how you think about like spreading your money is based off of like who's bringing in the money. And so my question is like, especially when we talk about Title IX and even just like football and basketball for boys and young men, like how does this impact like sports selection for parents at the youth sports level and at the high school sports level?
I think that's an amazing question, man, because I think sports selection is a topic that's overlooked way too often if we're looking for some type of outcome in a sport, right? Because like every sport has its critical factors and position specific things that you need to complete or you need to execute. And then there's physical gifts that you possess or you just have from a cultural standpoint that positions you well in each one. I think the key is the exposure to these different sports at an earlier age to give our athletes, whether it's a dichotomy of skill set or just interest across the board, because when you're looking at it, I mean, we talk about the top 1% of people that play football get into the NFL. We really miss or skip over the fact that 90% of people are eliminated just from the gene pool based on the positional standards, right? Like you have to be this fast, you have to be this big.
Yep.
So once you get rid of all those people, like those percentages of if you're in those, if you run this fast, you're this big, those percentages actually become pretty favorable for you to play football.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like without the training and all those different type of things. So if you do that same type of operation in other sports, whether it's like, hey, I got this kid that's into it and into doing things their own way, and they're individualistic and they're disciplined. Maybe a skill-based sport like tennis might be good for that person. And they play and it, like this can leverage this out. So kind of looking at the different characteristics of the sport and the athletic traits and just makeup of your kid earlier and earlier. And that's like exposing them to multiple sports at a young age to be able to get that, the receptors going, and for them to see like, hey, where can you identify that talent? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity in soccer and tennis and field hockey for just like athletes, and baseball for athletes that whether just get pushed into football or pushed into basketball to have better outcomes when you're looking at the numbers, whether it's Lamine Yamal getting paid $220 million. And we're talking about NIL deals here with guys making 150,000. Like, no, there's a 17-year-old Spanish kid making 200 million.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, so like, what are we talking? What are we really talking about? But I think that's a level of exposure of us kind of opening our purview to really what is the sports business and being a sports asset is.
Yeah. Exposure is key because a lot of these sports, particularly, and I'm dealing with this now with my daughters, like they've played field hockey, they're playing tennis. These are sports that were completely foreign to me growing up. And I'm like, oh, like, how does this work? And so like, basically I looked at it and said like, hey, like, you have a good amount of athleticism. And if you could take that athleticism that is typically applied to some of these more like like athletic-based type of sports, i.e. basketball, football, whatever it is, and reapply them to like more skill-based sports, there's a really interesting opportunity there. And especially just thinking about just access and awareness, but like there's opportunities for scholarship. And then now, as we're talking about, there's opportunities for cash, man. And cash, not only from the schools, but also from the collectives. And so where I'm going with that is like, what happens to these collectives? Like, do they get phased out, or like, do they become even more important in this whole new landscape that's evolving?
So that's a pretty critical point right now, because within the new settlement, they have this NIL Go that's powered by Deloitte, which is a clearinghouse for all NIL deals over $600. This was originally implemented to police the collectives, to make sure that people weren't paying players value that just was made up out of thin air, right? So that there's a real market value attached to the player. That's what this is going to happen. I don't think they're going to be able to police it to determine what a player's free market value is, but I think it's very interesting when we talk about looking at other sports and how the sport of football or basketball, like it commoditizes the athlete. Because if you're special in an individual sport like tennis, we've seen Coco Gauff make, $4 million this past weekend, where some guys played their whole life playing football and they played 5-6 years and only made $3 million, right? And like, so you're talking about the top of the top in tennis, not to say that, but you talk about just the different makeups of the sport and like what you're targeting for, and like being intentional about that. And especially when you're looking at a college system that's giving you barriers of entry of like, okay, well, if you want to play football, okay, you can make this much money here. And there's like ways to make NIL if you play tennis, because I know tennis players, hey, they're getting more opportunities to make money off of the court than they ever were before, like outside of going pro or anything of that nature. But I think the sports selection within this new ecosystem is supremely critical, because everybody's going to be chasing the football, basketball bag, but there's
everybody wants that golden goose.
Everybody, right? And
I mean, rightfully so. Like if you're going to go after it, but there are other opportunities out there. And especially like, again, with like this collectives, but if again, you're going after the golden goose, there's a lot of dynamics that come into play. And on this podcast, we've talked about culture and culture development. But with this new ruling, and again, cash can complicate things. It can bring in different dynamics and feelings of like jealousy, envy, all these other types of things that start to show up. What kind of tension do you think this creates in the locker room? Or is there any additional tension that is being created with this new ruling in the locker room? Because in theory, guys have already been getting paid and female athletes have already getting paid. So do you think like this changes the locker room dynamic with this new ruling?
To an extent, but I think the locker room dynamics have been exposed in the past 5 years if we kind of start paying attention to like what has happened around the ecosystem. Let's take it back to like 2021 when Texas A&M had the highest recruiting class in the history of 247. Just happened to be coincidentally the first year of NIL payments, right? Like, just
did that ever pan out? Did that work?
Huh?
Did that work? Did that?
No, because Jimbo Fisher got fired, right? So, so I guess back to my point is
the highest recruited class ever didn't necessarily pan out, and the coach
didn't necessarily pan out, and they got them based on money and not necessarily like strategic talent acquisition and building a program. So I think that's what we're going to get into in this ecosystem where a lot of professional coaches that work in college and talk about asset valuation and things of that nature. And so it's going to be really important to have guys assess athletes the right way to make sure that they're paying the right players that are contributing to win shares that go to everything else and the economic impact if we're going to start paying players from the revenue sharing model, right? The strategies like across the board are going to continue to shift because there's real money involved. And like I said, like the past 5 years, I think we've seen it with like that Texas A&M scenario where like it didn't work out. We see teams now where they have a rookie or a freshman like standard money pool, right? So that they're not coming in making more than other guys. But then you have some teams in the South, they're paying their big money players and everybody else, hey, we got to deal with it. And then like that's the talent management piece of the whole business. And I think that's why these coaches get paid the big bucks though. So yeah. I guess what I'm saying, the talent management is going to be a piece of it, but that's why the coaches make $10 million.
Yeah. Coaches are a really interesting piece on this as well. Offline, we were talking about like how some of these coaches show up at the camps that you were at literally this weekend. And it was like 3 different flavors. One wasn't even present. One was very present. And one was like, you know what, you're here and I'm going to let you know who I am day one. Right. And it's kind of all across the board. And coaches are really, they're already colorful characters in their own right. But what do you think happens to coaches and their leverage in this new model, especially with the transfer portal, et cetera, and especially, we cited Texas Tech and they had the best recruiting class ever. Coach gets fired. Like, how does this impact coaches?
I think it shows the coaches that have a true identity and leadership will separate themselves because you can't go with the waves of what's hot right now. You have to search for stability. And the only way that you have stability is to align with what your actual philosophy is. And I think even for the recruiting process, it gets confusing to coaches as well, because they're trying to figure out who's the right player versus stars versus height, weight, measurables, and things of that nature that fit underneath that umbrella. So for coaches, I think it's a matter of like making sure that they find themselves from an identity standpoint and making sure that their staff is clear about which way that they're building and that alignment is there. Because you can have coaches where their jobs are predicated on what players they bring in. And so like, hey, I need to pay this guy just to make sure that I have my job security, but that might not be the best player for the overall team, and standing firm on what that head coach vision and the overall philosophy of the program is. I think that's what's going to separate coaches moving forward, because it's a new dynamic that they're not used to dealing with when the money piece comes into it. And you talk about retaining talent, acquiring talent, and developing talent within all those things, because behind the scenes, like, players have been holding coaches hostage a day before the game because a player has gotten a raise and they want a raise. And so just different leverage points, but I think it's going to continue to happen. And this may make it a little bit simpler because they're going to give bounds to, like, if you break some of the contracts, hey, you're not going to get your money. So I think there's going to be a little bit of balance moving forward.
Yeah. That's interesting, man, because again, money is good for the ecosystem, but when unchecked and kind of in this new era where like folks are figuring it out, it'll really be interesting to see how things unfold on multiple levels, from the coaching standpoint, from the player standpoint. And also, let's bring in, because we are moving into this world of like professional sports at the collegiate level, right? Like, I think we established that point in this new position, i.e. general managers of these teams and athletic departments, is really one that's been showing up a lot over the last few years. Like, what is their role in this? Like, how are they showing up? How does this impact them?
So it's funny, like the way that you mentioned the 3 different camps and the 3 different styles, that's the same way head coaches put their general managers and their duties under that umbrella, right? You have some general managers that only do roster management, handle the numbers. You have some general managers that are actually doing the relationship building, managing the coaches. And then you have like general managers like Andrew Luck, who's out in
Practice.
Stanford firing the head coach.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like it all
Yeah.
comes down from the leadership of the actual university president and athletic director, I would say, to where that general manager actually fits within the operation. Because USC's general manager looks more like I'm not going to say a stage director, but like more like a conductor of the show, right? Versus Miami's GM is like a true roster management guy from Ali Hosman from the NFL. You know what I mean? You got Bill Belichick. They got the Patriot way and how they do their things, right? Penn State, it's kind of a mix of the operation from the former amateurism model and then the transition with Andy Frank. So it's like everybody has their own type of model for the general manager. So it's going to be interesting to see like what actually works.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only way to figure out what actually works is to try different things. So we're going to see.
When there's no bounds, right? When there's no bounds or like true rules, I think that's where the creativity and the professionals in the business can separate themselves. That's why I tip my hat off to a Jim Harbaugh, because like regardless of Connor Stallions and like the hoopla around that, it takes some gonads to kind of figure that out and kind of execute it, regardless of it's right, wrong, or indifferent. But to do that and to get the national championship, that's why I think sometimes this whole business we get that veil over our eyes is like, this is a bottom line business. And I don't think you guys realize, like, if someone's trying to keep their job for $12 million, they'll do stuff to try to make it work. And like, and that's across the board.
That's a lot of incentive to keep my job. 12 million reasons.
In a competitive sport, and we talk about talent acquisition, and that's where I want people to realize, like, I know the recruiting game gets very corny and, colorful with the pictures and stuff, but like the business behind it is extremely serious to the point that the juxtaposition between the two needs to be studied.
I got a scenario and a question, because I thought of this when, I saw the ruling come out over the weekend for guys who are already high NIL earners, i.e., let's take the Michigan quarterback, for example, who's getting like $10 to $12 million. How should we, or how does he, more importantly, think about his value? Because he's already got $10 to $12 million committed to him. And now there's an additional pool of money. And I just mentioned like Michigan's committing 75% of like $20 to $25 million to football. Like, does he command more of that money as well, or is he already, quote, taken care of? Like,
for right now, he's taken care of. But like, if he like any contract, if he outplays that in a year or two, or he's like
going back to the table,
go back to the table, right? Like we're talking about like the normal
that's
NFL
a different
operation.
Money. We were talking about collective money and NIL money, and now we're talking about a different pool of money, and I need a piece of that as well.
Because they called Dave Portnoy to the table and Larry Ellison to get this guy up here. You know what I mean? And so, so when we pull out the big guns, and now they have to give some money to that quarterback position moving forward. So, as long as he's playing at that level, he's going to be a highly sought after guy, right? Like,
I'm gonna just throw it out there. We need to, spread a little bit of love to some of those skill positions as well. Get some big guys, some true number ones on the team so that he could check the ball to. Just a suggestion, a gentle suggestion, but we're gonna see, man. But let's move to really how athletes and families, how they should start thinking about their value, their leverage, and ultimately the strategy moving forward. And let's kick off with just like some considerations and questions as a parent. When you see this ruling, and let's say that you have a highly recruited athlete and you're like, oh, like my athlete can now get paid by the school. What are some of the things that parents should be thinking about? What are some of the questions that they should have top of mind as they're going through like this recruiting process, particularly with this new ruling?
100%. That's a great question and a dynamic question, because there's a lot of things within there that they can dive into, whether it's getting an insurance policy, making sure you get a degree. I mean, we talked about this earlier in one of the earlier Blue Chip Academy episodes. It's all entertainment, but making sure that you own your content. Like when you have that leverage point going into the game, understanding the different ways that the business makes money, and see if you can be a part of that as well. You know what I mean? Because like there's revenue sharing that comes from TV and things of that nature, but we talk about individual NIL. Now that we're formalizing a business, now formalize your business as well, right? And that's like and making sure your body's taken care of from an insurance standpoint, making sure You have your marketing materials or the media that they capture that you can own that from a standpoint, making sure that you get your degree and any type of supplemental educational resources that you need moving forward. If you know what you want to do in a career, make sure that certain things are set up for you. So like while you have the leverage as a highly touted athlete, I preach leaning up against the rules a little bit to make sure you get what you want. I kind of did that when I came through the recruiting process.
Yeah.
And so, but you have to be proactive to be in that position. Like this isn't something that just kind of happens. It's like, oh, now I know what to do. It's like, no, that's a planned out thing where you're crafting leverage throughout the entire process. So when you get to the table, you can have these leverage points to demand what you want from a standpoint to make yourself, incubated and best to develop.
Should they think about just the top line number, and the top line number being like evaluating a school based off of how much they're paying players and using that as the number one criteria? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm actually against that. I understand why people say like, oh, whoever's paying the most money, that's where I need to go. We need to understand that we're still in the development process. Whenever I talk to families or a parent or athlete and they're talking about money and everything between the colleges, I kind of ask a pretty blanket question. Like, do you see yourself as like $150,000 athlete or a $10 million athlete? Right. Because like, I think that's the kind of question that you're asking yourself. If you see yourself as a $10 million plus athlete, then the focus needs to be on development in this avenue of development. And the money right now can't trump the different situations, the coaches, and all those different type of things that help you hit that maturation level as an athlete to get the big thing or all the different things. And you balance that out to which school is valuing you the right way as you're going through, right? So if a team's offering you $500,000, I'm not telling you to go to a team that's offering you 50.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like, unless you want to be an astrophysicist and that's the only school that offers that and you want to do, you know what I mean? There's stuff that comes up, but that's how I would look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And so basically it sounds like not much changes because again, money was already kind of a part of the conversation. But again, like now there's an expanded pool of money that's available to you.
The main thing that changes is a tighter evaluation process. I think that is the piece that for athletes and families that need to understand is down at the schools have
tighter evaluation process on the families or schools or both?
Evaluation processes from the schools to the families and the athletes. Like who's going to come onto this team? Who's valuable enough to pay and take up one of these 105 spots or these X amount of spots in this sport? Because now we're like invested in blue chip assets. We can't have guys that are crashing out, not taking the classes and doing different things of this nature because there's money associated with it. So like the evaluation process is going to look a little bit more like professional sports and that comprehensive evaluation of like, yo, what are we really getting? Because we're going to give this person money. Like, how can I predict an 18-year-old with $200,000 to act? So that evaluation process when you're 16, acting like a goof or not showing some level of discipline and continued growth throughout that recruiting process is how they're going to judge you when you go to the table going into the NIL process. So I think as you're going through, you have to prepare with another level of strategy and with experts going through the process if you're trying to hit a certain outcome. And that's like playing high level sports in any sport in college.
And the outcome being whatever you want it to be, or
I say outcome. If you want to get a college degree at this point, like you're going to have to be good. If you want to get a college degree from a D1 school, you have to be good enough for that school to allocate some funds to you, whether scholarship or paying you. Do you know what I mean? Like, because like now that they're paying you, that's why they cut the roster limits because it's like, hey, all 105 guys can have scholarships, but we're not going to have 150 guys just walking on and them paying their way. Like it's a real thing. If you're not providing value, you can't play.
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't know, man. It's a huge question to consider, especially when you think about like outcomes. And where I'm going with this is like, this is a considerable amount of cash that some of these young men and young women could start to make. Even you think about like the Texas Tech softball pitcher, she's pulling in $1 million a year. Like, this is real money and real money that can get your life off to a great start. It's not forever type money, but it is money that, can give you a nice springboard into life. And so that's why I was asking about the outcome, because like outcomes can vary and incentives to hit those outcomes can vary as well. But with this amount of money that's now being presented to these athletes, like I always ask myself, does it dilute the dream to become a professional athlete? In like the four major sports, there's always been like this esteem, not only from like I made it type of standpoint, but also like real financial impact, because up until that point, you never made a dollar. But now, some of these kids are making, whether it be 200, 300, whatever the number is, millions of dollars, even before they, get close to the pro ranks. Like, how has that impacted incentive? Well, have you seen that impact incentives and not incentives, excuse me, but more so like perspective on what I want my actual outcome to be? Like, has it been watered down because there's been an injection of cash on the collegiate level?
It's interesting. I think it's made it clearer to identify the assets that will make it through, because now that there's so many different rewards early in the process in high school, 7-on-7 offers, you get these different critical evaluation points to see how this athlete is going to respond. Oh, he gets some money. This is how he's going to respond. Oh, he's doing this. And then you can kind of predict if he's going to continue to develop, because the ones that actually are still high quality assets, like we talk about, where this new dynamic doesn't change them, those guys stick out even more in this landscape. And those guys are even more valuable in terms of what the teams are willing to pay for, or what the teams are willing to do to have those guys on their team, because they do stick out like a sore thumb, because families don't realize it, athletes don't realize it, but the ones that are in it for the things surrounding the game, they tell them themselves pretty quickly throughout the process, because now there's just a lot more evaluation points to put that in front of their face to see if they take that carrot, how they act when they take that carrot. Are they full or are they not? And then you can kind of judge what's going on. So all that happens is, instead of getting 24 months of evaluation going before you go to the NFL, now that 24 months is stretching to like 6 to 8 years, which is only harder for the athlete.
If you get a carrot, right, the proverbial carrot, and folks are evaluating like, oh, what is he or she going to do when they get the carrot, and they see that, there's implications based off of how you respond when you get that carrot on whether or not you'll get future carrots.
1,000%. Like we saw it with Nico, the Nico kid from Tennessee coming out of high school. He made $1.2 million. You say he got a carrot, whether it's bad people around him or whatever the case may be, to go somewhere else. Immediately, an NFL GM came out and said, like, whatever money he cost himself there, he's going to cost himself more with us. So that they were just evaluating how he maneuvered in that college situation with the coaches going to them and how he conducted his business. So like, they're evaluating that right now. So like, that's an example, but there's guys that have gotten paid and continue to perform, right? We could talk about a Cam Ward. You see him, he left Washington State. He was about to go to Ohio State. They told him to kick rocks for $1 million. He was about to go to the NFL. And then Miami was like, hey, we'll take you. He came in there, did what he was supposed to do. And you get an evaluation point. It was like, oh, he was told no, he was told this. He didn't go to the NFL. He came here and then he kind of did this. And now you can have all these different pixels to kind of predict future behavior. And like, that's kind of what happens through this process, where I don't think families or athletes recognize that all these different nuanced pieces is just more evaluation points to understand what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah.
To an extent, it dilutes the real ones, or dilutes the ones that are playing for the money around the game. It might have messed me up when I was coming through the process. Me, like if I was coming through, it would have messed me up.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying, bro. Like, this is real cash, man. And I always ask myself, I'm like, man, like if, I was getting paid $150,000 a year, does my belly get kind of full? And does that kind of impact some of my work habits, my training habits? Like, especially from a psychological standpoint, like, do I think I made it? Am I slacking off? Right? Like, all these considerations that I'm thankful for my experience. Also, I'm like, man, it would have been nice to get paid. But, on the other side of it, I'm like, man, like, you just have to wonder, because these financial rewards are being introduced at particularly such a young age, where there's a lack of like maturity, a lack of financial literacy, so on and so forth, man. Like, it could end up being a slippery slope, because the reality is, you see, like, even when people make it to the professional ranks, and then when they are more mature, and when they do have like more, I guess, support and resources around them, you still see like very bad results. And
so I was going to ask you, how did you get drafted? You're with the Steelers. Like, how did you keep? Because you got the carrot. I would say getting drafted is a carrot. I would say signing your letter of intent is getting a carrot. Getting your first offer is a carrot. it's just not real money, right? Now that those carrots are packaged up with actual value and real life movement with it. How was it for you once you got drafted to like say, like, I need to get to the second contract? Like, or did you feel fooled by the claim of coming? Because I think you see the same thing in the NFL. The guys that get there is like, oh, he's just happy to be here. And then you see the guys that like, they're working like undrafted free agents and they might have been a first round pick. How easy it was to identify those guys in the NFL.
Yeah.
They still stick out.
Yeah.
Say it again.
They still definitely show up and stick out. I mean, for me, man, it was still a matter of like, look, one, I didn't get paid in college. So man, I need this cash. I want to get cash. And the notion around conversation in the NFL is like, get your second contract, get your second contract. And I was a 6th round draft pick. So like, I had like a modest signing bonus, definitely less than $100,000. And back in 2008, like the rookie minimum was $295. Right. So, post taxes, that's like $150,000. And so like there was still a lot of hunger and drive for me to make it, quote, make it even after.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? From a financial perspective. And that's why I say I'm thankful for my experience, because I feel like that built up a sense of resilience, a sense of discipline, and a sense of like awareness to really just kind of self-awareness to make sure that like you still got to kind of put the work in, because ultimately, I'm a big believer in like what got you here ain't necessarily going to keep you here, particularly at the professional ranks where they have this thing called the draft that happens every year where somebody is getting drafted to proverbially take your job. And 100%. So like, you still got to maintain that hunger. You still got to find ways to maintain that edge. And that happens even after you get your second contract, right? Because I looked at it like, look, if this is the minimum that I can make, right? Like, so you're incentivized by making more. And so like, if it came down to it, like, this is the worst that it can get for me, like, man, like, let's shoot for the stars here, because it's literally a once in a lifetime type of opportunity.
Even from that, you hit on something that I think is pretty critical. Like even from when people have been in the NFL or played in professional sports, they know everyone has a saying like, yo, you got to get to that second contract. You got to get to that second contract. But outside looking in, everybody thinks everyone's happy that they got drafted. I think that hasn't happened in college yet, where they're telling the players like, yo, you need to get to that second contract. Like there isn't no money on the entry point. It's the money's in when they deem you valuable and they can't live without you. Like that's when you really make money. So like transitioning that piece of the entry point to being the celebration, to being a dynamic person within it that can hold that value is when you really, you really have the leverage within the business. You know what I mean? Because we could talk about it, it, like when you're that big money player on the team, you get treated a little different.
Yeah, man. Everybody
comfortable.
That cash. You get treated
a little comfortable.
So you take everybody out to dinner. You take everybody out to dinner. I want to talk really briefly about like forward looking, because we talked a lot about cash and money in your pocket, but for a lot of these sports, particularly like football, which we're very familiar with, and even other sports, like there's a level of risk associated with it, right? Around like injury, long-term care. I mean, there's a bunch of things that you need to be aware of and consider. And especially, thinking about this sense of benefits and like how can ultimately you use sports and leverage sports long beyond your playing days, and how can sports ultimately take care of you. And so like, basically where I'm going with it is like, what's the next step beyond this? Is it like a union showing up? Is it collective bargaining showing up? Like, all right, step one is like, okay, we got a bag coming to us from our schools. What is the next step that athletes need to take as it relates to just whether it be equality, whether it just be like athlete well-being, athlete empowerment? What does that kind of look like from your end?
I think from the standpoint, one, they have to be proactive, right? You have to have an understanding of where you're trying to go through in this business. And then like, I think partnering with experts is super critical, because until like, we got to realize before they unionize or all those sports unionize and there's a collective bargaining agreement, that's going to limit your earnings all over the place. There's going to be a lot more rules and different things and regulations that protect you, will also limit you to have some level of, I can't say opportunity, but level of leverage, right? So like in this time where you can have leverage, I think it's a real interesting time to be an enterprise asset and start viewing yourself that way. And that takes time and a runway. So like whether it's more than checks, right? It's about reframing athletes as enterprise assets. Every performance, every social metric like matters, and understanding how they're valuing their journey going through this whole process. Moving forward, I think that's what's going to be very critical, because we've seen mean, the NFL has a union and a collective bargaining agreement, but the outcome impacts aren't always the greatest, even with those things in place. My idea is like kind of transitioning that down with younger athletes, less qualified people around them. I think there needs to be a more proactive approach in putting professionals and experts around those enterprise assets and develop them to dominate and succeed well beyond the business is going to be critical moving forward. So
Yeah.
whether you're a football player, basketball player, I mean, you're talking mid six figures from back pay only. I mean, the direct compensation starts moving forward and all this stuff, man. Preparation equals leverage. And LIG Sports Group has helped to kind of craft and draw that value and get returns on your ROI throughout this process. And I think that is the mentality all athletes and families need to continue to go through this process with.
Yeah, you got to have it, man. That's super important. One thing that I've always believed is, and I'm sure you know this to be true, like the university is going to get it out of you, right? Whether it be practice, games, your name, image, and likeness, whatever it is. And you got to make sure that you're getting it out of the university as well. And so, money is the first step, but, I'm a big believer in like benefits. Even when I was in the NFL, I was always supporting the union, was a player rep, and just really understand the importance of like, look, there's eventually a day after for all of us. And that day after, meaning that like the day after you're no longer an athlete, the day after when you're no longer tackling somebody, shooting a ball, swinging a bat, whatever it is, swinging a club, doesn't matter. There's a day after. And that day after, you need to figure out two things. One, like, who are you? But then also, how do you take care of yourself? And how do you take care of yourself is really, really important. And my charge is around like schools and universities to really figure out like how they take care of players and their athletes long after their playing days. I'm a big proponent of a lot of the benefits that we get from the NFL,
right?
Whether that be through the trust, whether that be through the NFLPA, whether that be through the NFL itself, and like leveraging your benefits, both from not only a healthcare perspective, but also from like a professional development perspective. And so what I would like to see is just now that piece be more developed and some resources and monies being allocated to like holistic care for athletes, right? Like the financial piece is exceptionally important, but also too, like this player development piece is equally, if not more important, because you don't want to just give a man a fish, you want to teach a man a fish. And I can count too many guys that I know who have went to universities, large and small, and haven't extracted the value out of their time at the university and pretty much left empty-handed. Yep. Without a degree, without direction, without support, and without resources, and have fallen on very hard times, whether that be after their time in the NFL, right? So like holistic athlete development and being ready for that day after is something that, I'm a big believer in, and would just, I'm going to continue to shout from the mountaintops around like, look, money's great, money's important, and it's great to have in your pocket, but like, look, man, we need holistic care. So that's the next step, man. But this was a powerful episode, man. Any parting words that you got for the people?
I mean, I second that 1,000%. Holistic player development and management is what we're about at LIG Sports Group. Life is good, because I mean, it's critical when you talk about the holistic management and development that comes to your performance, right? And just like you said, that sets you up to maintain and have success after your playing days. And to be able to take full advantage of the resources like the trust and things of that nature that Mundy's speaking of, that these different professional leagues put in place, like you have to have a foundation to even take advantage of those. So make sure you guys are taking care of yourself and understanding, being proactive about this process, because it's nuanced, it's cutthroat, it can get dangerous, and it leaves people in shambles if you don't understand the pitfalls and the things that can happen throughout it. So again, we're here at LIG Sports Group, Sports Asset Management and Advisory. This is Blue Chip Academy, your trusted sources from pros, by the pros, you know what I mean? For the real strategy. You know what I'm saying?
And the bottom line is, again, it's this $2.8 billion settlement. It marks a major turning point in college sports, and one in which, we believe is long overdue. But again, it's not just about the money. You need advisors, you need support, you need resources, because ultimately it's about rewriting the rules and really forcing everyone to rethink how the game is played. And with more opportunity comes more responsibility. And so if you're an athlete, a parent, a coach, you got to be thinking strategically. And this is not just about exposure anymore. It's about equity. It's about planning, and it's about long-term positioning. And so if this episode helped you understand and bring some clarity to you, share it with some folks that are navigating this space. Again, for Blue Chip Academy, I'm Ryan Mundy with Justin King. We'll be back soon with more insight, more truth, and ultimately more blueprint. Until then, keep building.
Let's get it. Subscribe and like. See you guys next week.
Subscribe and like and download the episodes.
There we go.
Get out there.